So the more and more that we look into the SNC Lavalin case, the worse and worse it gets for the Trudeau government. Because ever since this is picked up, I only released my episode about a day ago where we were discussing this situation, and more updates have come out, and the more and more we look at it, it really looks like there was political interference from the Prime Minister's office, even possibly directed by the Prime Minister. So the first thing I'm going to show you today is a cartoon that ended up coming out for the Chronicle Herald, I believe it's called. I just saw it on Twitter, but I thought it was too perfect of an opportunity to pass up. And yeah, the Chronicle Herald. Because this pretty much defines the Liberal Party of Canada right now. There's really not much more to say besides that, is that as time has gone on, we've seen how the image that Trudeau has tried to put out has really disappeared. And this, I believe this scandal is going to be icing on the cake for all the average people out there who don't really pay attention to politics, or even our Liberal supporters. Of course, the Liberals are going to have their supporters regardless, but I think for the most part, the average Canadian is going to see what this government is made up about. And if these average Canadians start talking to other people who are more politically knowledgeable than they are, then they're going to be informed about everything Justin Trudeau and his government has done. And from the looks of the way that this case is going to go, it's going to go into the election period. And this is also on top of the Norman case that's going on, the Vice Admiral who's been on trial, and there's been a lot of shady stuff that's been going on with there. So all these controversies, I believe, are actually going to play their part come election period. But let's get into the actual, let's get into what we have so far today. So it's been a lot of the NDP and Conservatives have been calling for an investigation into the SNC Lavalin case, because this, as I said, put the title of my last episode, this is corruption at the highest levels. Well, Justin Trudeau ended up saying that he would block any probe into the SNC Lavalin case. Now, this would be from parliamentary committees, not by the Ethics Commissioner, because he doesn't have control over the Ethics Commissioner in order to look into this case, although we're going to get into more of that in just a minute. But as this from Post Millennial says, the Liberal government in Ottawa appears to be doing everything it can to ensure no investigation occurs in regards to the recent SNC Lavalin scandal. According to the Toronto Star, a senior Liberal official has made it clear Justin Trudeau's government will not yet waiver solicitor-client privilege, that's for Jody Wilson-Raybould, which would give her the latitude to speak about the allegations, nor will it permit parliamentary committee to proceed with its own investigations. Now, keep this in mind. Keep this in mind right here, because that's going to come up in just a minute. If true, that would mean that the Liberal government, along with the new Attorney General, who is not Trudeau's lawyer, but rather the people's lawyer, believe information of corruption within the inner sanctum of Ottawa deserves no serious scrutiny. And that's more of the way that the new Attorney General has presented it. He says that after discussing this, after discussing with Justin Trudeau, he believes that there's no reason for an investigation. So two things for you to remember as we move through this story. The first one, that Trudeau tried to block any committee from doing a probe into this, and the second one is that the current Justice Minister and Attorney General has said that there is nothing to look into when it comes to this SNC scandal. So they make reference to the Star article. This is what we have here, came out on the 9th, and it says, Trudeau's government will not yet waiver solicitor-client privilege, which would give Jody Wilson-Raybould latitude to speak about the allegations, nor will it permit a parliamentary committee to proceed with its own investigation, the Star has learned. A second government source, just skipping over what it says here because it's just saying that an anonymous source from the government said that the government will not waive the privilege, the attorney-client privilege. So that is, again, an anonymous source, but so is the second one they make here. They say a second government source confirmed that the potential criminal trial, as well as SNC Lavalin, appeals of prosecutors' denial of a mediation deal makes waiving privilege unlikely. Nor will the government agree to demands by the Conservative New Democrats for an emergency meeting of the Common Justice Committee to summon Wilson-Raybould and Trudeau's top political aides to testify publicly on the affair, the senior source said. Now, my only real thing of skepticism that I have here is the fact that these are anonymous sources once again. We were having the anonymous sources come out against Jody Wilson-Raybould that we saw in episode 91. They were talking how she was a thorn in the side, about how it was very Jody-centric. These were all anonymous sources. Now, it's quite possible that there is some merit to these sources, but I'm always a little skeptical whenever the news media likes to bring up that they learned this from an anonymous source. But judging from what I've seen so far, I believe this to be true. Trudeau has been very secretive as to how he's conducting himself in this scandal, and within, for his point of view, good rights. I mean, if he gives out any sort of information that could possibly link him or the Prime Minister's office back to actually trying to persuade Jody Wilson-Raybould to intervene in the SNC Lavalin case, then that is pretty much confirming what everyone believes, and then that is the sort of thing, as we learned in last episode, can bring down a government. Now, as I stated just a little earlier, the ethics commissioner, despite the fact that is opening a case into this, that has been confirmed. Trudeau has no control about whether the ethics commissioner can actually open up a case into his conduct. The only thing that he can control is the parliamentary committees, as whether they would. But the fact that he wasn't allowing any probe into this, it says a lot. It says a lot, because if he was actually innocent on this and these sort of accusations are coming out against him, then you would think that he would want to actually want a probe into this to prove that he had nothing to do with this. Now, I'm just quickly switching over here to show you something. This is from CTV News, because remember what I said earlier about how he's trying to block that probe? Well, it says down here, Ethics Commissioner to launch probe. Prime Minister Trudeau welcomes it. So apparently he didn't want any investigation into by any committee, but the Ethics Commissioner is totally fine with that. And this is all just misdirection that he's trying to do. He's trying to, once again, he's running damage control. It's public relations, where he tries to pretend like, oh, absolutely, we're open to the investigation. Meanwhile, just before, he was trying to block every possibility of investigation into this. And let's not forget that Justin Trudeau is the only sitting prime minister to ever be found guilty of violating the ethics code. And he was found violating it 4 separate times back in December of 2017, I believe it was? No, 2018. Sorry, my mistake. It was because of what he did in December of 2017 that he was found guilty. So this is quite a possibility. But a lot of people don't have confidence in the ethics commissioner. The current ethics commissioner, I always forget his name, Mario Dion. A lot of people see him as another Liberal puppet, because he wasn't in, Mario Dion was not the one that did the last investigation into him, but he took over afterwards. A lot of people still see him as more of a Trudeau puppet, and a lot of people, myself included, feel that this should be an RCMP investigation into this whole situation, because if this is as bad as it sounds, which I believe it is, then that could actually mean that somebody in the government could go to jail over it. But as it says here, Ethics Commissioner launches investigation into political interference allegation in SNC Lavalin case. Wayne Long, a backbench Liberal MP from New Brunswick, broke ranks and joined the Conservatives and New Democrats in calling for Justice Minister to investigate the matter. It seems that we have at least one Liberal who has some integrity, some principle, and is at least calling for an investigation. That's good to see. It says here, Ethics Commissioner Mario Dion confirmed his investigation Monday in a letter to NDP MPs Charlie Angus and Nathan Cullen, who raised possible violations of the Conflict of Interest Act. In the letter, Dion said he had reason to believe that the possible contravention of Section 9 of the Act may have occurred. That section prohibits public office holders from trying to influence decisions that could improperly further another person's private interests. Speaking to reporters at a housing announcement in Vancouver, Trudeau said he welcomes the investigation. It's extremely important that Canadians can continue to have confidence in our system. Boy, you could, even just reading that, you can smell the BS that is coming through the computer screen. He said he has met twice with Wilson-Raybould, who represents a downtown Vancouver riding since he arrived in the city on Sunday, though she has not present with him at the announcement. He said he still has full confidence in Jody and said she acknowledges that he has affirmed her independence as Attorney General in a meeting months ago. Well, if he still had full confidence in her, then she would still be the Minister of Justice and Attorney General, then, wouldn't she? And now all I've highlighted, circled down here, or boxed in, I should say, is them quoting what he ended up saying. But we have a video of that right here we're going to take a look into. Just give me 1 sec.
I have met with Minister Wilson-Raybould a couple of times already since arriving in BC yesterday. We spoke about our shared goals for our country and for this government. She confirmed for me a conversation we had this fall where I told her directly that any decisions on matters involving the Director of Public Prosecutions were hers alone. I respect her view that due to privilege, she cannot comment or add on matters recently before the media. And I also highlight that we're bound by cabinet confidentiality. In our system of government, of course, her presence in cabinet should actually speak for itself.
Oh, boy, what a load of crap. Now, let's just reanalyze that for a second. He talked about how they expressed their shared goals and visions for Canada. I highly doubt that, considering everything that both of them are facing right at this moment. That seems very unlikely to me. And then he tries to then shift the blame to her, as trying to suggest that because he told her this, which I doubt he ever did, that because of that, she is actually solely responsible for whatever takes place. Well, that doesn't mean that it stopped the Prime Minister's office from actually engaging in acts such as this. And then he says, well, we're bound by cabinet confidentiality. He can waiver that. This is the whole thing. He's not letting her speak for herself, but he has every single chance to waiver that confidentiality and allow her to speak for himself. If he's not afraid of what she's going to say, then this is exactly what he should be doing, but he's not. And that says a lot to me. You need to look at what he's not saying and what he's not doing rather than what he is saying and is doing. It's because when Justin Trudeau is lying when he opens his mouth. Now, we're going to get into this clip here. This clip right here that I'm going to show is not very long. It's from the CTV that I was saying, interview that I was showing just a little bit earlier about Trudeau says he welcomes the probe, the investigation, which clearly he doesn't. But here, but this is going to be very important, so let's take a listen in on this.
And this investigation now is not going to go away easily. The opposition parties are demanding to have committees. The government's going to look bad saying no. This government kind of needs some kind of political and double indemnity. They're already in trouble over the firing of the admiral and the court case. Yeah, and the court case that's going to come up about that, perhaps during the election campaign. And this one will last, I think, well into the campaign.
You know why they're so angry at her too? Because I spoke to one senior Liberal, very well connected, also well connected to SNC Lavalin. They're saying that she knew she was part of the cabinet, which brought in this deferred prosecution bill, which everybody on the Parliament Hill called the SNC law. And she knew that this was coming in, and this was the intention of them to do that. And then when the Prime Minister's people went to her and say, we got to do this remediation agreement, they blew her off. In fact, one person told me, she said, if you want me to do that, you get the Prime Minister to call me and ask him to do that.
I think her position in cabinet.
Wow. If that is true, I believe this guy, what was his name? Robert Fife, I believe it was called. Hold on. Anyway, I believe this guy that if this is what he knows, because he's connected to politics, he's a reporter for the Globe and Mail, then he should bring that up with the ethics commissioner, because that right there could be the connection that we need to prove that Justin Trudeau or someone in his prime minister's office was trying to influence this case. That is saying a big part about this. And the fact that they called it the SNC bill, the SNC legislation or something like that, I should know this.
I spoke to one senior Liberal, very well connected, also well connected to in this deferred prosecution bill, which everybody on the Parliament Hill called the SNC law.
The SNC law. So they're calling it that clearly because they put this law in place to try and assist SNC Lavalin in their upcoming case. We can actually sort of probably prove that with what we have available, and we're going to get to that in just a minute. Give me 1 second to find exactly what I'm looking for. Just don't want to spoil everything. Okay, here we go. This is what I'm looking for. So, this right here, the remediation agreement and orders to address corporate crime, is about this remedial agreement that they're talking about. Now, this remedial agreement, pretty much what it does is that a corporation that employs thousands of people, that if it was to, because of crimes it's committed, it would be bankrupt and have to fire all those people, lay them off. This would allow them to substitute a criminal court case with making some changes to their constitution, to their rules, and also by paying fines. So this allows them to continue. And this is apparently what SNC Lavalin is already claiming. Now we scroll down here to the bottom. And it says, coming into force, subject to parliamentary approval, the remediation agreement regime will come into effect 9 days after the Budget Implementation Act, which contains the proposal legislative amendment received royal assent. That was the 2018 budget. This right here. C-74, an act to implement certain provisions to the budget table in Parliament on February 27, 2018, and other measures. So this means that it's not even been a year since this came into force, which makes it sound like the government was making a preemptive strike on this SNC Lavalin case, considering that they knew that the trial was upcoming. And it also makes a little more sense as to why they may have had to they must have to mediate. Because if it looked like they weren't going to, if the prosecution wasn't going to accept this remedial agreement, and we're going to prosecute SNC Lavalin, then that was why the government would have to get involved. This keeps looking worse and worse on them. But we have a little bit more from that clip that we saw. This one was put out on CTV News' Twitter. So we're going to take a look at that. It's from the same interview. Here we go. Damn it. I made a rookie mistake. Here we go.
Gerald Butts, the principal secretary. Gerald Butts. The opposition parties are saying, let's call Gerald Butts, the principal secretary, the chief of staff, Katie Telford, sorry, Matthew Bouchard, who's a senior policy advisor in Mr. Trudeau's office, who, by the way, met 12 times with SNC lobbyists, as did Mr. Butts, also met with SNC lobbyists. Call them before the committee, along with Miss Wilson-Raybould, and find out what the hell went down here. But do you think the Liberals are going to do that? I wouldn't put any money on it.
If Wilson-Raybould has a principled difference with the cabinet of which she is a member over an important matter, she should resign and tell us why she's resigning. And that should happen here.
But the different thing is, she didn't do it. She could have resigned if they forced her to, but she didn't do it.
That's the thing.
She did the right thing.
She showed steely determination.
Yeah.
All you have to do is go back to the tape of her being sworn in as Veterans Affairs Minister. She looked furious. She knew what was going on. But I think that what's playing out now is her way of saying, this is what happened. I don't know what part she's played in getting it out, but certainly there are clear indications that people are willing to talk about what happened, and that's why the Prime Minister's office is digging in. Another person that should be interviewed in that committee is Mr. Warnicki, the head of the Privy Council office, because I suspect he's got a lot to say as well.
Yeah, interesting.
And you know what is also interesting is this will not only have domestic repercussions, right? This is the government that has told us the rule of law during the whole Huawei chief financial officer's arrest, the fact that she's detained in Vancouver, and this is why the international community, the credibility of Canada, they have built up this, rule of law image so high and so mighty, and it will fall flat on its face if it is indeed, if we can connect these dots, if we find out that they have tipped the scales of justice, this will completely change
Joyce,
a whole international
the Mark
conversation.
Norman case.
Absolutely.
I mean, the
That's
same
another
thing.
one.
They're denying the court documents
Yes.
that they absolutely need to be able to, so Mark Norman can defend himself. They're hiding documents
Yes.
from the court.
You know, I gotta say, this has been one of the best panels on CTV News that I've seen in an extremely long time. They are just bang on what they're talking about right now. And they make reference to the Mark Norman trial. That's because, right now, alleged political interference in Mark Norman case more concerning than SNC Lavalin accusations, says the defense. The thing is that this will actually give the defense of the Mark Norman case a lot more fuel now that this has come out against SNC Lavalin about them trying to get involved politically. Only the difference is, in the Mark Norman case, they want to convict him for leaking some information. Now, again, I don't know too much about the Mark Norman case, but what I do know is that I'm on Mark Norman's side. That's what I know so far. I might change that in the future if more information came out, but as it stands, I see no reason why that shouldn't be, and all I've been hearing is of political interference in the Mark Norman case. Anyway, getting back on track. So we're going to be talking once again about their new Attorney General, Lametti. So the reason I bring him up is because he came out, when this first came out, he ended up, when we first heard about these allegations, he came out and said, well, I spoke to the Prime Minister, and it seems like there's no reason for an investigation. Well, it looks like that the new Attorney General has some dirt on his hands as well with everything that's going on. Because he came out and ended up saying, this came out yesterday on the 10th, Attorney General Lametti says SNC Lavalin settlement still possible. This is because the prosecution said on the 8th that the Federal Director of Public Prosecution orders court to reject SNC Lavalin plea to avoid criminal charges. It says the Federal Director of Public Prosecution has ordered the court to reject SNC Lavalin's plea to avoid criminal proceedings. The decision came in the midst of an ensuing political and judicial scandal that involved the highest levels of the Prime Minister's office. The possibility for remediation was a measure introduced by the Liberal government only last year in the federal budget. Earlier this week, it was discovered that the lobbyists from the company met with the federal officials over 50 times where they discussed the topic of justice. Gee, I wonder what the hell they were talking about when they were discussing the topic of justice. So as this article from Globe and Mail ends up saying, new Federal Attorney General David Lametti says it is still possible he could issue a directive to the prosecution service to settle corruption charges against SNC Lavalin Group Inc. out of court. He would do this because if this actually went on, if the court if SNC Lavalin went to trial, and we start digging into the past on this, then a lot of dirty laundry would be aired for the Trudeau government. This would look extremely bad on him. So he's going to do everything he can to try and make sure that they still give out these remedial repercussions over actually charging them on the corruption charges and facing criminal charges on it. Especially if people in the Prime Minister's office could go to jail if that knowledge comes out. He says, quote, there is a specific set of rules that would allow the Attorney General to direct a public process in a transparent process through the Canada Gazette, he told CTV News Question Period on Sunday. That remains a possibility, but I am not going to comment on the possibility of that now because the case is before the courts. Under a 2018 federal law affecting corporate crime, prosecutors may stay criminal charges to protect jobs and shareholders where companies agree to negotiate terms including the admission of wrongdoing, a fine, and undertaking to clean up their act. That really doesn't sound like too much that they have to worry about with this situation. Like, just for everything they're being charged with, that is a slap on the wrist. SNC Lavalin is asking the Federal Court of Canada to shut down the prosecution and order Kathleen Roussel, the Director of Public Prosecutions, to negotiate a settlement. Prosecutorial discretion on whether or not to proceed with charges has long been deemed a central feature of Canadian law. It is not normally subjected to a court review. But the new law allowing out-of-court settlement of charges against corporations known as remedial agreements put judges in a supervisory role, and SNC Lavalin appears to be arguing that the role begins when the prosecutors decide to lay charge or negotiate. I really hope that whichever judge is the one involved in this case, I really hope that they decide not to go this route where it comes to the remedial agreement, and they decide to stay on the course and actually charge SNC Lavalin and take it to the courtroom, have every single piece of documents that they have that they can present to be searched through to see if the Prime Minister has anything to do with this. And I believe that this is what we're going to see now, considering what we found out about the Prime Minister's possible involvement in this case. I do believe that we're going to see an actual court case, and this remedial agreement is going to be thrown to the wayside. But again, remember, it was this guy, David Lametti, who ended up saying that he spoke to the Prime Minister's office, and he felt that there was nothing there, no reason for an investigation. Well, he knew more about this than he's leading on, because from here, the Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying of Canada, in 2017, SNC Lavalin Inc. lobbied David Lametti, then the Parliament Secretary of the Minister of ISED, Innovation, Science and Economic Development in Canada. So he was lobbied by them, and he knew about this. At least in some way, they lobbied him. I'm sure that they must have had a reason to do this, and it was probably had something to do with the court case that was coming up more than anything else. And he's not alone, because if we look through the Commissioner of Lobbying, the Office of the Commissioner of Lobbying, we look through their documents. Hold on. There we go. We can see here that this is SNC Lavalin that is talking to different members, different areas of the government, and many of them have to do with the Prime Minister's office. We can see here Matthew Bouchard, Senior Advisor, Prime Minister's office. Up here it said Matthew Bouchard from the Prime Minister's office. Atomic Energy of Canada, all over the place. Minister of Trade. But if we actually look specifically for the Prime Minister's office, that's this one right here, we can see that it goes far down the list. And now, granted, this goes back to earlier days. They've been registered as a lobby since 2005, but we do know that in 2018 they were lobbying, in 2017 they were lobbying, in 2016 they were lobbying, and many of this had to do with justice, that has been pointed out. In this situation here, which happened on the 20th of November 2018, they were lobbying, and it was for the federal budget 2017 and 2018, infrastructure funding and renewal, innovation, recommendation to support the manufacturing sector, policy changes related to white-collar crime. The budget of 2018 was where they implemented the law, this remedial agreement that would allow them to settle out of court. And one of the things that they ended up lobbying for was policy changes related to white-collar crime. White-collar crime is stuff such as what they're facing: corruption charges, bribery charges, things such as this. This is consistently looking worse for the Trudeau government the more that we dig up. And I would love to see the Trudeau government brought down after almost 4 years of these the bullshit corruption that we've seen on Parliament Hill, after the way that he has talked about Canadians. I would love to see him brought down. Now, believe it or not, there is something that Justin Trudeau said that I do agree with. This tweet came back in 2013. Retweet to call on the Prime Minister to testify on the Prime Minister's office ethics scandal under oath. It's from the 28th of October, 2013. Well, Justin, I agree with you. I agree. I would love to see the Prime Minister testify under oath about the ethics scandal that is facing the Prime Minister's office. But will he do this? He is the biggest hypocrite that we've ever seen come in office. Now, the last thing I'm going to touch on before I sign off, this actually went a lot longer than I thought it was going to, is something from the Toronto Star. says Tory leader Andrew Scheer met with SNC chief to discuss criminal charges. Conservative leader Andrew Scheer met with the head of SNC Lavalin to discuss criminal charges facing the Quebec construction giant in May 2018, the opposition leader's office confirms. Scheer discussed a possible deferred prosecution agreement with SNC CEO Neil Bruce on May 29th. SNC is pushing for a so-called DPA to avoid criminal charges and relate to fraud and corruption in its work in Libya between 2001 and 2011. Now, I don't believe, though, that Andrew Scheer is guilty of anything even remotely close to what the Prime Minister has done. I think that they lobbied him and they met with them to discuss this because they were trying to, that SNC Lavalin was trying to branch out and figure out all their options, try and get as many people to support this idea, and if they could get the Prime Minister and the official opposition to support this, then they pretty much could guarantee that this would be the outcome. The thing is I feel like Andrew Scheer's reactions to this scandal and that run contrary to him having any involvement in this. And anybody, maybe not my new subscribers know, but some ones who've been around for a while know that I actually have more affiliation with Maxime Bernier than I do Andrew Scheer, that I have my problems with Andrew Scheer. So I'm not coming from in this situation, I'm not coming from a position of bias where I support Andrew Scheer, so that way I want to defend him. I genuinely believe that Andrew Scheer in this situation didn't do anything wrong, that he met with the CEO of SNC Lavalin, but it didn't have the outcome that they wanted, because it's not being reported that they met multiple times. As far as I could tell, this was only 1 or 2 meetings that they held together. So this is what I believe was coming out of this, and why this is coming out about Andrew Scheer meeting with them. I just wanted to touch on that just to sort of put my thoughts about it out there. But once again, as I said yesterday or the day before, I can't remember which one it was, pay attention to what's going on, because this is going to be a huge case. More is going to come out, and the more that we can dig up, the more that of a chance we have to bringing down this corrupt government. Not saying that the next one's going to be any better, but after almost 4 years, I'm pretty done with Justin Trudeau. I got nothing else left. I've got no patience for him left. In fact, it's gotten to the point where I hate seeing his fucking face. That's how tired of the man I am. Anyway, thank you all for tuning in. And if more ends up coming out about this, I'll be back here soon to give you another video about what's going on with SNC Lavalin. Have a good one, everyone.